Machine learning. I want an honest answer from everybody when I ask the following questions. Raise a hand. Who thinks machine learning is a bunch of BS? Series of if statements, if you will. All right, good, only two. No, you don't. I know you guys. All right, which is good, because it isn't. And I'm here to convince any naysayers that it is not. Second question, who thinks that you need let's say a master's or even a PhD in comp sci in order to use machine learning in any practical sense? Raise your hands. You don't. So, here's what my presentation is about. I am Angelo Peretta, and let's dig into machine learning. So, we are going to answer the following questions. What is machine learning? And in particular, what is natural language processing? And what can we do with language when it comes to machine learning? Number two, to answer that prior question, what third-party tools exist to process natural language? So in essence, we don't need to roll our own and get that PhD and get that master's in order to do so. And what does natural language processing look like in practice? How can we use it in a Drupal context? How can we use it outside of a Drupal context? These are all things that we're going to explore. Again, I'm Angelo Peretta. I've been in the Drupal space for about between 6.5 and 7 years. My Drupal handle is captainpants, an ode to Captain Underpants, the favorite childhood novel of mine. Email is angelo@calamuna.com. I do work for Calamuna, a very socially responsible web organization within Oakland, California. Calamuna partners with socially impactful institutions, primarily associations, agencies, and governments, to help them solve today's most pressing problems. We were born out of Oakland, California, but we've evolved to be so much more than that. We've branched out essentially to Canada, Romania, Central America, the East Coast, and what have you. I myself am a Toronto resident, along with several other employees of us. Rob Loach, for example, in the audience. He's from Toronto as well. Hey, Rob Loach. And as I said, we do have quite a long laundry list of clients. Here are our higher ed clients, a couple of health-based clients as well as tech clients, utilities clients, government-related clients, et cetera, et cetera. So we don't really confine ourselves to just one industry. You give us a problem, we'll essentially solve it, regardless of what space you may or may not be in. But let's dig right into it. What is machine learning and natural language processing? I am going to dig a bit into a definition, and I'm going to read along with you so that we have a solid foundation for what's to come. So machine learning is a field of computer science that uses statistical techniques to give computer systems the ability to learn with data. Key emphasis on statistics, key emphasis on data, because those two key points essentially mean it is not a series of if statements. We feed the machine data, and the more data that we feed the machine over long periods of time, or little periods of time in the case of parallel processing, the more accurate results we'll eventually get from our machines, the better we'll be able to process language. And by the way, it goes without saying, data changes over time. It allows the machine to learn. In the case of language, it can evolve in several different ways. The sentiment of words may change. Sick could mean I feel very ill, I'm not feeling well. Or it could mean, yo bro, that's sick. It could also mean, or rather, new words are created over time. Microaggression didn't appear in the English lexicon several years ago, but now it is a thing, and it is something that machine learning does need to pick up on in order to gather its context. And the definition of words change over time as well. And perhaps words gain new definitions. They could mean more than one thing. The word tweet, for instance, could mean the sound a bird makes, or it could mean, I'm chatting on Twitter. I'm sending an angry tweet to a politician or what have you. And machine learning will pick up on these things over time, the more data that we get. In particular, what is machine learning in the context of natural language processing? So, Natural language processing, NLP for short, is an area of computer science and artificial intelligence concerned with the interactions between computers and human natural languages. In particular, how to program computers to process and analyze large amounts of natural language data. But the question is, how exactly do we do this? We can think of 4 different ways that we can analyze natural languages: sentiment, entities, topics, and language identification. So, what exactly is sentiment analysis? Sentiment analysis, at its core, is meant to tell you, generally speaking, does text make you feel good? Does text make you feel bad? Well, think of feelings. Think of, depressing, angry, sorrowful. All of those feelings would be placed under the negative sentiment end of the spectrum. And on the positive end of the spectrum, what text makes you feel happy, joyful, what have you. Think of news articles. Well, news articles tend to be quite polarizing nowadays. If they were to talk about a hurricane, for instance, Hurricane Florence that recently happened, generally speaking, the text that we would feed natural language processing and machine learning would have a negative sentiment. And as we go on, it's important to note that negative sentiment is generally represented as a spectrum of numbers. The technologies that we're going to be showcasing soon, -1 to +1. -1 being negative sentiment, 0 in the middle, meaning neutral sentiment, and +1 being positive sentiment. And all the tools that we're going to be using, we'll show that as we go on. So, entity analysis. What exactly is entity analysis? Pulling out proper nouns and improper nouns and figuring out what they mean. There are quite powerful tools that allow this. One of them being Amazon Comprehend, another one being TextRazor, and we'll touch upon those as we go along. But as you can see here, I fed this single sentence to natural language processing, and I was able to pull out entities, proper nouns like Amazon Inc., Seattle, Washington, and a couple of other pieces of data, be able to separate what they mean. Are they a person, a place, or a thing? And give you that information back. Topic segmentation. Goes a little bit further when we're trying to figure out what text is about. I feel that this is most powerful when talking about, in practicality, things like news articles. What is a news article about? If you take a look at this sentence over here, Google, headquartered in Mountain View, unveiled the new Android phone at the Consumer Electronics Show. You can tell that a Google tool in particular figured out that this was about electronics, software, mobile technologies, and what have you. And language identification is a little bit self-explanatory. Sometimes in the case of pineapple, it may not be too obvious what language pineapple is. In the case of English, as you can see, pineapple is quite distinct. But more or less, language identification is quite self-explanatory when talking about natural language processing. But now that we know what we can do with natural languages, what tools exist out there to provide us the power to do this kind of thing without needing to program it ourselves. So we got 4 different tools. This is not an exhaustive list, by the way, and I do encourage you guys to do a little bit of research on your own and figure out if these 4 tools can satisfy your business needs or if some other tool can as well. So we got TextRazor, Datamuse, Amazon Comprehend, and Google's Natural Language Processing API. And we're going to go through these and see what they're all about and what they can do. Datamuse. It's primarily concerned with entities, and it is a little bit of the special snowflake outside of the 4 in that it can tell relationships between words in many, many different ways. We're talking about synonyms of words, antonyms of words, meronyms of words, which is a word that's part of another word. A leaf is part of a tree, a trunk is part of a tree, roots are part of a tree. It could actually figure out what words rhyme with other words in case you want to further your rap career. And I was really curious, and unfortunate to say, nothing does rhyme with orange. At least according to machines, nothing rhymes with orange, other than door hinge, but that doesn't count. And if we do click into the Datamuse API, you can see that it covers things like words meaning similar to other words. For example, ringing in the ears. What other words can we use to describe ringing in the ears? If we click on that, tetanus, ring. I assume that this is some sort of ringing in the ears medical condition. I'm not entirely sure, but quite a large number of words can mean something similar.
Can you increase the font?
Oh, I apologize.
Thank you.
You know what, let's increase it a little bit further.
Thank you.
There we go. Quite a powerful tool. However, you may not see its practical uses quite yet, and that is understandable. I mean, how can I use ringing in the ears to solve a business problem? Believe it or not, you can. We'll touch upon that a little bit later on. But moving on to something that, at least on the outset, seems a bit more practical, and that is TextRazor. Actually, before I move on, I do want to make clear that Datamuse is an open source service, thankfully, so you can play with it as much as you want. You can hit its API not as much as you want, but within reason. So I do encourage you to play around with it and figure out if it does solve a business need for you, or just to play around with it a bit, because it is quite a nifty tool. But TextRazor. TextRazor is a commercial tool, but it is quite cost effective. It's fantastic at topic segmentation and has entity analysis, but it doesn't have sentiment analysis, which is unfortunate. So we can't figure out whether or not text is positive or negative generally. But when it comes to topic segmentation, quite powerful, as you can see. Here's a small sentence about Barclays, which is a financial company. And unfortunately, they may not have been doing some good things. We can see that this text is about investments, it's about the economy, in a nice hierarchical taxonomy structure, similar to how Drupal's taxonomy and vocabulary system works. See the parallels? See kind of what we can do with software in an automated fashion nonetheless. And it does have entity analysis as well. So it is able to take proper and improper nouns from the text you feed it and give you a lot more context into what they mean. You can essentially use it to build a dictionary based off of any kind of text you can feed it. Amazon Comprehend. It is part of the Amazon Web Services suite, and like most, if not all things regarding the AWS suite, it does have a pay-per-use model. It actually is quite cheap. We're talking cents per every 1,000 characters or tens of thousands of characters. Really, really, really cost effective. It does have fantastic entity analysis and decent, in my opinion and in my experience, decent sentiment analysis, but does lack language identification and topic segmentation. And for the purposes of what we're going to be doing in Drupal, topic segmentation is quite key, so we're going to have to give this a pass. Still powerful nonetheless, however. And as you can see, given this sentence, it was only able to pull the proper noun Jeff Bezos. He's an important guy. I guess volcanoes aren't as important as Jeff Bezos. But also, given the following sentence, it's quite a sad thing to read. We can see that there is a lot of negative sentiment. 0.93 negative. 0.93 out of 1. But let's move on to something that, in my personal opinion, is the most powerful tool. Google's Natural Language API. It essentially does all the things. It has the same payment model as AWS. It's a pay-per-use model, and quite cost-effective as well. Very, very powerful. Given the following sentence, it could pull several different entities out of here, and, well, it can figure out if it's a person, a place, or a thing. A conversation really, or conversation rather, is something outside of its categorization, so it chucked it into other. It does have a magnitude here, which, in essence, magnitude determines how much of the sentence is about this one entity. Not a lot. It's only one sentence. It's not a lot of data to go off of, but when you pass in paragraphs or even entire novels, it tends to be a lot more powerful. And this is quite a positive thing to say. As you can see, its score out of between -1 and +1 is 0.7. And of course, as we previously saw, it does have some pretty strong topic segmentation as well. In, of course, a hierarchical kind of structure, perfect for Drupal taxonomies, perfect for Drupal vocabularies. So, practical uses. I mean, we can use these third-party tools, they do exist, but what kind of business problems could we use, or what kind of business problems could we solve with these kind of tools? How many of you guys know what that logo on the left is, the green G-looking thing? So, for those of you that don't know what it is a piece of software called Grammarly. And Grammarly is a piece of software that augments your bad camp talks with something that's a little bit more compelling to your audience, augments your best man speeches, augments basically anything you type, emails for whatever instance. Don't you think that maybe, just maybe, we can use Datamuse in order to build our own Grammarly? Perhaps. Hemingway Editor is a competitor to Grammarly as well. So these products do exist, and third-party tools like Datamuse do have their practical uses. I found more in product development, less so in brand management or what have you, but it is quite a powerful tool, and I suppose you could use it for your rap career as well. So it does branch out outside of software. So sentiment analysis. What could we use sentiment analysis for? Brand management, social media analytics, and if you are not too keen on using the 5-star module, you can actually have just plain text reviews, and we can get sentiment from that. And let's dig a little bit deeper into that. So, social media analytics. I'm not too sure if you could see that, so let's read along. On the left-hand side, we do have a post from Facebook. It's quite a positive post about somebody who was awarded tickets to a baseball game from Coca-Cola. And they're gushing about Coca-Cola. They're really happy what Coca-Cola did for them. And we can see that their post has a score of positive 0.3. Thank you, Coca-Cola, for the Blue Jays tickets. It was my first time going to a baseball game. My father and I had so much fun. Really positive. But let's contrast that with what was said on Twitter about the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Take him, he's yours. All his tweets are propaganda. He's done nothing good for this country. He supports criminals and murderers with allowing terrorists into the country. It's only a matter of time. Something awful will happen, etc., etc. Very negative. But these are just single tweets and single Facebook posts. What would happen if we were to average scores out from millions or billions of these posts? Very automated, very easy way to figure out the sentiment of your brand, the sentiment of your politician, the sentiment of what have you. Very powerful. But sentiment analysis does have its shortcomings. namely accuracy. I'm going to read along with you a restaurant review. Got food poisoning here. Half the roast chicken I ordered was so old and almost gray looking, it looked like it had been scraped off the floor. It tasted so old, like putrid chicken. I sent it back. It was the worst meal I've ever ordered from the restaurant. -5 in the negative 0.5 in the -1 to +1 spectrum. Very negative. Do you agree that this is a positive 0.8? Manager walking around with his head so far up his ass, it's practically enjoyable to watch. Maybe. Maybe some people would like to enjoy that. The Google Natural Language API definitely would enjoy that. It gave it a positive 0.8. Can't pick up on sarcasm. It can pick up on some intricacies of languages. You could think of it as somebody that's new to a language. They may not pick up on things immediately. It comes with time, it comes with experience in living in another country or studying another language. Same thing with natural language processing. And last but not least, topic segmentation. And thankfully, you don't need to even program this yourself in Drupal. There are two fantastic modules. They go hand in hand. Let's increase that size a bit. One of them is called Google NL Autotag, Google Natural Language Autotag. And what it essentially does is it takes text that you feed it in any full text kind of field, and it will automatically generate a vocabulary and taxonomy hierarchy for you based off the nodes you save, based off the content you save. This depends on another module as well that I'm going to try to find what the name is. I can't remember it off the top of my head. However, it depends on the module, so you will eventually find it out. That one is just purely for taking any text, not really hooking it up to the taxonomy system, and figuring out, we'll take for instance sentiment, take for instance entities from the Google Natural Language Processing API. But let's see it in practice. I'm going to take a small sentence over here. Unfortunately, you can't see it as of yet, but I'm going to paste it into a new node that I'm going to create. Let's up the ante on that one as well. There we go. I'm going to create an article. I'll just call it cars. And the text that I'm pasting over here is about Volvo, Geely. Basically, it's an excerpt from an auto magazine. And what do you think will appear in an automatic fashion under this taxonomy field? Let's save and find out. Autos and vehicles. Quite automatic, quite easy, and quite powerful when you feed it tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of nodes.
Does it generate the tags or just classify into existing tags?
Generates the tags. Of course, it'll upsert essentially. So if the term doesn't exist, then it'll create it. The term does exist, and it just passes it over.
Is it hierarchical?
It is hierarchical. In fact, I'm going to show you a couple of other pieces of content that I've already provided it. This one's about a Vancouver brew hall. Food and drink, restaurants in particular. And given the several test nodes that I provided it, if we go to this vocabulary over here, there you have it. I passed it a couple of news articles with regards to hurricanes, hence news, weather, and sensitive topics, because the death tolls from hurricanes could be quite daunting. But in essence, it does this all automatically, which is quite powerful. And there are many, many more examples that have to do with natural language processing. The first example over here, and I do encourage you to click on this slide deck once it does get posted, using sentiment analysis to gather either positive sentiment or negative sentiment from movies. That was something that was using data from IMDb, building chatbots in Slack, monitoring. This last one is quite interesting, especially if you're in the financial space. Facebook, its stock price didn't do so well in the last couple of months because of shortcomings in its revenue. People talk about it. When people talk about it in that light, it's quite negative. Don't you think that there's a positive correlation between what people's sentiment is and stock prices? I highly encourage you to read that article, because that's exactly what happened. And maybe, just maybe, you can process that language before other people talk, or before the market really gets to it, and act upon it before the market does. And anecdotally, in the beginning of this talk, I said that, or I had asked, how many of you think that machine learning is BS? And I was one of those people. At the time, I was told by my manager, we want to do machine learning. And that was it. Okay, well, thank you very much, but what kind of business problem are we trying to solve? And it came in the form of feeding data to Elasticsearch. I was working for a media company, essentially. And we had tens of thousands of videos and tens of thousands of news articles, neither of which had been categorized in any meaningful way. Well, we really didn't have time in the content team to do that kind of work manually. So we just fed all of our data to Google Natural Language Processing, got quite accurate results. About 87% of what we fed it came back with accurate enough categories, and we fed that data straight to Elasticsearch, and we created a search product out of it. So again, it does have its uses. We saved probably hundreds, if not thousands, of people hours otherwise. And there's value in it. There definitely is value in it. Thank you so much for listening to my talk. And, well, enjoy the rest of Back Camp, everybody. I'd be happy to answer any questions, either during this session or afterwards. So, any questions?
Have you run across any of these trainable tools that would be useful for doing automatic summarization of content?
So the question was, would tools like this be able to summarize content in an automated fashion? From what I've seen, unfortunately not. However, there may be tools out there that do that kind of thing. None of the four that I had gone through do that. So, unfortunately, I can't give you an answer. Okay, any other questions? You, sir.
How do we make the machine learning smarter to avoid manipulations of NLP when there's like a false positive?
It essentially, so the question was, how do we prevent false positives? Can we ourselves do something that would make the machine learn more? And that would be up to the third party that is providing the service. Google would, for instance, feed data to this machine, and perhaps, and this is just anecdotal, perhaps have some human intervention saying, yeah, machine, you got it right, or yeah, machine, you got it wrong. So it would learn in that kind of sense. And you would essentially, when it comes to machine learning, set out goals for machines. I don't know if how many of you guys are gamers? Good. How many of you guys know what Dota is? So there was a piece of AI in Dota that was able to play the game better than professional players. But how exactly do you teach a machine to do that? You have certain events, oh, my character died, which are negative, and the machine will try at all costs to avoid, given several thousands, hundreds of thousands of scenarios played out. And you'd have scenarios that are positive, I kill the other guy, that are, the machine recognizes as something that it wants to do. Something similar to that would most likely be in the natural language processing space as well. So it wouldn't entirely be on the onus of, let's say, human intervention to make it learn. Okay. Any other questions?
You did some kind of initial evaluation for the projects you worked on. I'm just wondering whether there could be some follow-up involving human beings or human in the loop kind of things.
Yeah, there could be.
Can you repeat the question for the recording?
Sure. So the question was, could there be any human intervention that we can build in to, I guess, essentially fact-check the machine? And yes, there could be. One idea is to go based off of confidence. Confidence is something that machine learning products will sometimes spit out to you to tell you, hey, I'm 95% confident I got this right, or I'm 85 or 75% confident that I got this right. If it's below a certain threshold, then we may be able to build something out that allows humans to say, yes, you got it right, or no, you didn't. Okay.
So perhaps you just answered the question, but let me pose it. So do you have any thoughts or observations where you think this trend is headed for CMS?
Okay, so the question was, do you know where this is going in the CMS space, where the trend is going? And at least in the Drupal space, there were those two contrib modules. When it comes to content, and I played around with this, and I do have a module that is in development right now that creates recommendation systems for news, essentially. Of course, a CMS and news organizations pretty much go hand in hand because people have to type out the articles that are on the website. But if we can somehow combine sentiment, which unfortunately nowadays, when it comes to popularity of news, tends to be negative, because negative sentiments tend to be more impactful to people than positive sentiment. But if we can combine sentiment of what's being written with topic segmentation and figure out, generally speaking, what an individual would prefer in terms of topics, that's something that we can push towards. That's something we could trend towards in terms of CMSs, automatically recommending content.
I was just going to suggest that you could also do like computer vision classification, so you can classify photos.
Yes, we could, Rob.
Uploaded content. You could also identify. They have tools that identify whether the picture might contain pornography or explicit material. So, there's all sorts of different things we can use for the CMS.
Exactly. So the comment was we can use, I assume you're talking about the Cloud Vision API or something similar to that.
I'm looking at Azure Computer Vision API, but yeah, there's other.
Yeah. So you're right. We could use other pieces of AI to filter out images. In particular, the Google Cloud Vision API. My colleague Rob Loach did a talk on it earlier today. I highly recommend you watch that online if you haven't watched it in person. And we could essentially, filter out some pieces of content if it's racy or adult, or even essentially do an entity analysis on pictures. So what nouns are contained within a picture? A cucumber, a hot dog, what have you.
Would sentiment analysis be helpful for spam protection?
Would it be? So the question was, would sentiment analysis be helpful for spam protection? No. Unless you are biased and you suspect all your negative reviews are spam,
Filter out all negative reviews.
which some people do. And by the way, I mean, if sorry about that. If something does have an extreme negative sentiment, it could be a competitor that is trying to do some shady stuff. But generally speaking, no.
Or someone reading my stuff.
So when the taxonomy is generated from this Google API, is there some standard taxonomy they're using, or and is it one of the standard taxonomies? Do you know?
Yeah, so the question was, what taxonomy law, I'm just not going to even invent words, what taxonomy structure exists, at least in the Google Natural Language API space? There is a set taxonomy, and it is within Google's documentation. It is a hierarchy of about 100 terms. And only 100, but it is quite exhaustive, believe it or not. It pretty much, I think it would touch upon basically anything you could ever think about talking about.
Yeah, we do medicine, so it's very specific, unfortunately.
Okay. This is, I think, a little bit more generalized.
And so kind of a follow-up to that, if you decide to change a term in it, will it know that, the module specifically, and link it up to the correct term as a term is generating like that?
Yeah, definitely. Down there?
I was just wondering if you could use natural language processing to auto-assign like schema.org metadata. Like, is there a module already for that, or just like to use those specific kinds of organization content?
So the question was, could we use it with schema.org metadata? I'm a little bit off context in that I'm not familiar with schema.org. Could you explain for the audience what schema.org is?
It's kind of a way of organizing so it's establishing a taxonomy for all different kinds of things in the world, like news and events and people. So you could tell search engines about your content through the metadata. So I might put something in your markup to say this is an event, and then I might say this is the date for that event, this is the name, this is the location, and then it surfaces that to Google. So I wonder if you could use a tool like this to kind of just automatically read through the content and apply those kinds of tags.
For dates, perhaps, but then again, if some natural language has more than one date, it's a matter of, okay, well, which one do you choose for the event date? I would think that it does have its uses, or could potentially have its uses, but you may need to be very careful, depending on what gets spit out.
I think what it might do, though, is if you're using schema.org, is it would enhance the ability of the tool to actually classify things, because your fields that you're classifying would be more obvious.
Okay.
Good answer. Any other, Chris?
So the whole concept of natural language thus far in presentations, online documentation, things that I've personally seen is very Anglo-centric. Any thoughts on other languages, even other cultures, because of natural language within, like, say, Chinese, for example?
So the question was, these pieces of software seem quite Anglo-centric, and, well, any experiences or accuracies with other languages like Cantonese, Mandarin, what have you? Unfortunately, I only know English.
Any thoughts on the whole subject, though? And
Well,
where maybe you've seen where that might be going?
my initial thought when you mentioned Chinese was language identification. It has the same character set, or very similar character sets, and, well, hopefully it'll be able to tell the difference. I think that with European languages, it can tell the difference, and European languages do have the same character sets. Beyond that, it's a little bit unknown to me.
Well, then, what about American English and British English? Will it be able to, know the differences and pick up on those meanings?
So the question was, what about American English and British English? And I guess that would extend to other, cultures and languages that are very, very similar, but would have slight word changes here and there. If I was developing language identification, then I would base it off of the spelling of words. For example, color in American is COLOR. In Canada and in the UK, it's COLOUR. So potentially, yes. Any other questions? Well, again, my name is Angelo, and feel free to ask me any questions after.